Hello, everyone, and welcome. We'll just give it another couple minutes for people to join, and then we'll get started. Welcome, Representative Fields. Thanks for being here. We'll get started shortly.
Hi.
Do you want to do an audio check? Can you hear us okay?
I can hear you great.
Great, and we can hear you as well. Thank you. Good evening. Welcome. We're just waiting another minute to get started and we will dive in. We're expecting a few more people and we may have people join as we kick things off, but we'll just give it another minute and we'll get started. Okay, my clock says 6:01, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time and we can begin. So good evening and welcome everyone. I'm Stephanie Berglund, the CEO of Thread, and we're really happy to be gathering. So thank you all of you for joining on such short notice because we have an exciting conversation about an active bill moving through the Alaska State Legislature tonight. So this is Thursdays with Thread, and if you're not familiar, Thursdays with Thread is a platform that we're using to bring you together when we have special news, current events, and a way to bring experts and partners into a conversation with us. So we started it during COVID to bring you kind of up-to-date and latest information, and now we're continuing with advocacy conversations. So welcome. Before we introduce our special guest, there's a few pieces of housekeeping that I wanted to go over. So Farah is going to help me with a few slides here. So you can start sharing, Farah.
Okay.
And thank you. So tonight, hopefully you saw as you joined that we are recording our session tonight. So welcome and thank you for allowing us to record so others can share. We also just want to remind you all of Zoom etiquette. I think most of you know that by now, but please keep your cameras on. We'd love to see you as part of the conversation. You know, like I said, we are recording and want to hear everyone speak. So please raise your hand. We are going to have time for discussion, or you can put your questions in the chat. And next slide. There, you actually can go to the next one. While COVID seems to be getting better in our communities, unfortunately, it is still with us. So we want to remind all of you to please stay diligent and healthy. We are encouraging all adults to get vaccinated, for you to be continuing to mask, especially following CDC guidelines. I know you all are experts at washing your hands and distancing when it's possible. So please help spread that message to keep all of us healthy and safe. Next slide, Farah. If you're here for training credit tonight, that's great. We're happy to be providing that for you. And your feedback is important to us. So at the end of the session tonight, I'll be dropping in a link for the evaluation and the code for that. So that will, if you have registered and both complete the evaluation, your certificate will be on its way as soon as we receive that. And then we have two special announcements. One is to make sure that you are receiving all of the federal stimulus dollars that are currently available to you. So if as an early educator, an individual award is available to you called the Alaska Seed Roots Award, that deadline is coming up in just a month. So I wanted to call your attention to that. And we have the Thread Phase 2 Childcare Stabilization COVID-19 Grant Award open. The great thing about this money for your program, it is if you're an eligible program, it is a non-competitive application, and the money is there for anyone who it would like it or need it to help them stabilize during the pandemic. So that deadline is June 1st. And we encourage you to check out these opportunities. You can find lots of information on our website about them, or you can always drop us an email or call us to learn more. We also have our awards nominations open. So if you are an early educator, you can be nominated. So I encourage you to nominate each other, nominate yourself, nominate all the great teachers in your life for the Cindy Harrington Heart and Mind Award. Oh, I think it bounced back. Thank you, Farah. And those nominations are due, it doesn't say in here, but my staff can help me probably that it's April 14th. I think those are due. Please check out our nominations. The award winner is recognized by Thread and our board and receives a beautiful glass award that you can see on the screen and $1,000. So we're happy to recognize people who are working toward and achieving excellence in the sector. So that is all of our housekeeping. Thank you, Farah. So now I'm excited to introduce our special guest. Representative Zack Fields is here. He is one of our Alaska state legislators from Anchorage, Representative District 20. He's an active working dad and has been leading some exciting early childhood legislation in the legislature. So we're really happy to have you here, Representative Fields. Thank you. I thought it'd be helpful for you to do a little introduction, and then we can talk about a little bit of a format and outline for tonight. Welcome.
Thank you, Stephanie, for the opportunity to be here, and it's good to be back. I think we talked maybe a month and a half ago, and I think it's good timing because in the last month, there's been significant movement on childcare legislation, namely the House Finance Committee passed House Bill 149, which would establish sectoral bargaining in the childcare sector and give the childcare sector a lot greater ability to determine how to allocate funds managed under the Child Care Program Office. It would also give the sector a greater voice over any potential regulations promulgated by the Child Care Program Office. And I was excited that the House Finance Committee added authorization for a child care trust fund to that bill. And the concept of a child care trust fund is an endowment that sustainably pays out money, kind of like the permanent fund does, to support the child care sector. So that bill passed out of the committee by a wide margin with bipartisan support, which is great. And I'm in the process of what we internally call gathering a chit sheet. So people sign their initials saying, yes, I'm going to vote for that bill. And 20 legislators have done that, which is great. I think I need to get a couple more signatures, but I think it is potentially realistic to see this bill coming to the floor shortly after we finish the budget. And I hope we do manage to pass the operating budget next week, which is kind of contingent on not having more people catch COVID. So that's the goal, to have the bill on the floor and pass it. And all of y'all's advocacy has been very effective. And I've definitely heard from other legislators who got the emails that were sent in thanks to Thread's organizing. And I also want to thank Stephanie, Blue Scheibler, Christina, and everyone else. I think, Candy from Fairbanks, who participated in the House Finance Committee. I think a lot of the members who maybe hadn't followed childcare found the testimony to be very compelling and maybe not something that they had thought about. And that's kind of rare in the legislature, honestly. So everyone did a great job raising awareness about the urgency of stabilizing the childcare sector. The only thing I'd add is, as this bill progresses, there are multiple opportunities to actually capitalize that trust fund. And we could either do that through the budget process or by what's called adding a fiscal note, which would be at the final committee in Senate Finance, where this bill to get across the House floor and head over to the Senate. So I think y'all's advocacy is important with the House, but it's also important with the Senate. And whether we're able to capitalize this fund is really going to be contingent on kind of the end of session negotiations with leadership. And I want to thank Tom Begich, who's the Democratic leader in the Senate, for pushing this and making it a priority. So to everyone who's advocated so far, you've done a great job. I think this is by far the most attention childcare has gotten in the legislature in the time I've been there, and that's great. So we're definitely making progress on educating people. But we also have another, month and a half to go, and I think it's really a time to double down and just see what we can make out of this year where we have an unusual opportunity to actually put some money into the sector and to empower the sector structurally. So I'm happy to answer any questions, Stephanie, and cover more if that didn't cover what you thought I should address.
That was perfect. By way of introduction, thank you so much. And we invite you all to listen to our first section. I think it was actually at the end of November when you were talking about collective bargaining and helping to educate us. I think one thing that I'm excited to share since then is that Thread's really proud that we have now formally endorsed House Bill 149 and are excited to be pushing out more information that hopefully you've seen over the last few weeks with that endorsement and support, and trying to get more education, awareness, and understanding of the bill. So together we can support your leadership, Representative Fields, and get it across the finish line, as you said, as an exciting opportunity for childcare, and really the first time ever we would have childcare legislation in the state. So I thought maybe you could start by, can you explain a little bit, just what is the intent of the bill and what is collective bargaining? And then maybe just talk about the two amendments a little bit and what those mean, including the Child Care Trust Fund. So maybe just kind of,
Sure.
5-10 minutes explaining what is it that this is exactly.
Sure. Collective bargaining, most Alaskans who have a family member in a labor union or know someone in a labor union are familiar with collective bargaining and what is called an enterprise bargaining context. And that means you've got an employer and you've got a labor union and they negotiate. That's done under federal law, the National Labor Relations Act. The thing is, when Congress passed the National Labor Relations Act, Congress excluded domestic work and farm work. And the origins of those exclusions were basically racism in the 1930s and the composition of Congress at the time. Because Congress excluded domestic work, i.e. childcare, state legislatures have a lot more flexibility in how we determine labor relations. And given that many childcare providers are single people in the home, very small operations, obviously we have some larger centers too. And given that, as far as I can tell, everyone in the sector really has the same needs: more investment in the sector, more power for the sector, more support for kids and for parents. One of the things that I've tried to do is think about what gives the sector the greatest voice in resources that exist now, but also what is going to tend to give the sector the most political power over the long term so that the sector can be as strong as possible. And I think both of those are really important. Short-term power over resources, long-term power to make sure that the sector has growing and adequate resources over time. So sectoral bargaining, which is what House Bill 149 would establish, is different from the collective bargaining that many of us are familiar with through family members, or maybe some of us have been in a union. Sectoral bargaining means, as a sector, you negotiate with the state. And the way that it would work under House Bill 49, if it passes, first of all, there would be an election. Everyone in the childcare sector, all roughly 6,500 people, would vote. Do we want to engage in collective bargaining with the state of Alaska? If a majority of votes cast said, yes, we do want to do this, then everyone in the sector would have the option of participating in that collective bargaining. No one would be made to participate in it, but you would have the option. And if you collectively bargain, then you would establish a union. And again, this is a little different union because it would be open to employees of childcare centers, to single people who have an in-home childcare business, and other people who work in the sector. And it's diverse, but I think it's important that the sector have a collective voice. So those who chose to participate would establish or affiliate with a union, and really you would shop around for the best deal that you could get. And this is a subject that we heard about in committee, and I can provide greater detail if people are interested, but you would establish your leadership to negotiate with the state. And when you negotiate under a sectoral bargaining framework, you would determine what you negotiate over. Maybe you want to establish a prevailing wage in the sector. Maybe you want to address the linkage between required training and pay raises. Maybe you want to try to bargain for some type of health benefits. All of those things would be up to you, but you would have a framework to negotiate for that. The other provision, so the first major provision of House Bill 149 is sectoral bargaining. And 10 or 11 other states have done this. And again, we did hear testimony from other providers in other states that have done this. And, you know, they've had success in getting more and more resources into their sector over time. They didn't double the amount of resources in the sector overnight, but with each round of bargaining with the state, they've gotten more and more resources. California is the most recent state to establish sectoral bargaining. In the first round of bargaining, they got a 15% increase in state resources and childcare, which, you know, maybe not enough, but it's pretty meaningful. The other thing that House Bill 149 does is establish a child care trust fund. This was an amendment Andy Josephson introduced. And the trust fund concept is important because, number one, I think the sector needs more power over existing resources. But number two, there just aren't enough resources in the sector right now. Hence this trap of inadequate wages for workers, too high of costs for parents, and a trap where providers can't really raise wages for workers without really, to an impossible degree, raising prices on parents. So how do we solve that? Every other developed country on earth makes a significant public investment in childcare. We need to do that too. Since House Bill 149 was introduced, of course, we've had a very significant change in global circumstances with the war in Ukraine. And partly as a result of that, not entirely, we have higher oil prices, which in turn produces more state revenue. So for the first time in almost a decade, we have a budget surplus. And we have a real opportunity to capitalize a fund and make a meaningful investment in the childcare sector. So Andy Josephson added that amendment on the childcare trust fund so that if we were to establish sectoral bargaining and you had more power, we would actually be able to put some money into it and really give you the opportunity to meaningfully improve working conditions in the sector and conditions for providers who have to make these tough decisions about what are the prices on parents, how many subsidized slots do you have in your center, and so on. So I think both are important, the power and the funding. They relate to one another. And then the other, so that was one amendment adopted in House Finance. And the other amendment was one that I asked Sarah Rasmussen to carry, which clarified that no one, if the sector collectively bargains under a sectoral bargaining framework, nobody will be required to join the union that participates in collective bargaining. You have the option. I suspect that many people would want to, because you would want to exercise that power with the state, but no one would be required to.
Thank you. That's a great introduction and overview. So I think this is really about all of you who are participating tonight and on the screen. So we can open it up for questions, discussion. I know one of the detailed schedules that questions that we can talk about in a little bit, Representative, is really just the timeline for all of these pieces. And I just want to underscore that you said, you know, this is a unique opportunity because of oil prices, you know, right now, and the surplus right now. So I do just want to talk about how the moment is now, you know, for people to take action and support this opportunity, because it may not come again for who knows when, right? So,
Yeah.
I want to make sure before we close tonight that we talk about just the timeliness and just what the schedule is next. But since you introduced and had such a great overview of the bill, I'm just wondering what questions people have about collective bargaining or about the Child Care Trust Fund.
I'll break the ice.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, hello, and hello, Representative Fields. Elizabeth Schultz. I work for A2P2 Now, All Alaska Pediatric Partnership, and I'm in an advocacy group with Stephanie Berglund and Thread for early childhood. So I've been excited to hear about this bill, and I do have a couple questions. One, as you were describing the sectoral bargaining piece and how it's one sector that creates this union, it made me wonder if there are other sectors that have done this in Alaska. If there's an example of another sector that's doing sectoral bargaining, just to help me think it through. And so that's question one. And question two is, and this might come up from other people too, is there a possibility to move the amendments? Like, if one passes, does the Child Care Trust Fund completely link with this bill right now? Or is there any chance that the bill for the sectoral bargaining piece could not pass, but enough people think we should be capturing some of those funds for a Child Care Trust Fund and that becomes a separate thing? Or is that not how any of this could work? Was that clear, my two questions?
Yep.
Okay.
Right now, so under federal law, we have an enterprise-based bargaining system. So, employer and employees bargain with each other, union or not, for almost every sector except domestic care and farm work. So no, we don't have sectoral bargaining per se in Alaska right now, because the number of sectors where you can have a sectoral bargaining framework is very limited under federal law. Now, there are some public policies that are sectoral standards. So like a prevailing wage in construction is a sectoral standard, but there's not a sectoral bargaining framework. There are other countries that have sectoral bargaining for many sectors. In Northern Europe, sectoral bargaining is common across the board. It's called the Ghent system, Ghent. It originated in Northern Europe. And I think when you look overseas, you can look at a really strong record of success in sectoral bargaining, because basically you tend to raise the floor in a sector. And you can, with sectoral bargaining, you can maintain good middle-class jobs in a sector over time across diverse employers, whether people are in a union or not. And that's the strength of it. So I think we know it works from overseas. We also know sectoral bargaining works from where other states have used it. As I mentioned, California's a recent example. We heard testimony in Labor and Commerce from childcare providers who have participated in the system and actually been around for the life of the system in the state of Washington. And it was pretty powerful to hear these childcare providers testify about how in the state of Washington, sectoral bargaining basically transformed a broken system into a childcare system that works with middle-class jobs. And, that to me was extremely compelling. So you also asked, is the Child Care Trust Fund and sectoral bargaining linked? They are right now, because they're in a bill, House Bill 149. Any bill can be amended. And if we're able to get this bill to the floor, I'm sure people will offer amendments. And if the bill passes the House, it'll go to the Senate. And I'm sure, it could be amended in the Senate. We in Labor and Commerce, we set out to try to look at all the potential options for what we could do to strengthen the childcare sector. And we actually did pass other legislation that would establish a tax credit for employers who want to support childcare, either by offering on-site childcare or by offering vouchers. And that bill, I just had someone text me 2 days ago saying, "Oh my gosh, Kentucky established this. It's a matching fund program for employers who support childcare." So that other bill that we introduced and passed out of Labor and Commerce, House Bill 121, is pretty similar to that. So I don't think that sectoral bargaining and Child Care Trust Fund are the only options, but I was struck by how, when we looked at it in Labor and Commerce, there aren't dozens of options. There are a relatively few number of options where you meaningfully empower the sector and you get more resources. And in a state with sort of a narrow division of power in Alaska, we're not an overwhelmingly Republican or Democratic state, and that has implications for how we think about the sustainability of public policies. I don't see other models out there that would provide a sector with power to sustain investments over time. And that's really important, because we're going to have budget scarcity in the near future. And how do we survive that and keep the resources in the sector?
Thanks.
Thank you for that. Jamie, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Representative Fields. My name is Jamie Shanley. I'm here in Juneau with the Little Eagles and Raven's Nest Child Care Center. And I have quite a few questions, so I'll just go ahead and read through them. And if I need to repeat any, please let me know. So my first question, I guess, is just this is the first time I'm hearing about the Child Care Trust. I have been listening in about your bill for quite some time now, and thank you. It's really exciting to have, an advocate and a parent working so hard to get our voices heard. So I love the intention behind this, but I often feel like when the state government gets involved, sometimes those intentions don't always play out like we had hoped. So that's kind of where my thinking is around these questions. So first question is, where would the trust fund go? Like, who would manage that trust? Would that be kind of through the state and the child care program office, or would that be something that is linked to this collective bargaining? Second question, when you speak about this forum of collective bargaining happening between the sector and the state, who would the sector be bargaining with? Would that be specifically with the child care program office, or would that be kind of like the Division of Labor Relations? And, kind of what does that really look like? My next question is, would the sectoral bargaining leadership be comprised of just providers and early education workers, or would you mentioned something about shopping around? Would there be contracts happening to kind of outsource other agencies to take on the leadership of those collective bargaining units, or would that really be like the boots on the ground people who are working in the field? And then my last question is, would these bargaining arrangements be implemented with a contract between the child care program office, similar to how the state handles their state workers who are union workers? So would there be like a contract in place between the sectoral bargaining unit and the CCPO, and how would those negotiations and agreements be enforced if there's nothing in writing?
Yep. So yes, you would negotiate a contract, and in sectoral bargaining, you as a sector would bargain over those things that you want to bargain over. So, if your priority is, hey, we want to establish some parameters for, wages and how much money goes into wages and how state money helps boost wages, you could bargain over that. If you want to bargain over the relationship between training requirements and wage premiums, you could bargain over that. What is in the contract would very much be driven by your, this is a prospective union. It would be driven by you bargaining over those things. You would basically set your priorities and bargain for them. Who would actually conduct that bargaining on your behalf? I would expect that it would be providers who you would elect to represent the bargaining unit. And, different unions can do it in different ways. And some have, if it's a nurses union, you might have rank and file nurses bargaining. You might have a full-time business manager who bargains on behalf of nurses. That would all be up to you. But I think, as a new sectoral bargaining unit, you would probably have frontline people bargaining for you, because they're going to be most familiar with what's going on. And but how you choose those people, again, that would be up to you as a group, because the people who you have as your leaders would be selected by you. There was another question I forgot, which I think the first one was.
Thank you. So
who manages the fund, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So under the framework of House Bill 149, the Child Care Trust Fund would be housed within CCPO, but because there's a sectoral bargaining framework, you as providers would influence how that money is dispersed. So if you had a Child Care Trust Fund without sectoral bargaining, CCPO would just run it, which, kind of like they do now. They, let's say they get federal funds, they kind of decide how to distribute them. And ideally they listen to you and they do a great job listening, but there's not really a structure to make them, right? under a sectoral bargaining framework, they would have to bargain with you over disbursement of those funds. And, your question about basically translating good intentions into good outcomes as a state, one takeaway I've had kind of through the whole process of considering childcare policy is, my takeaway is the more power the sector has to determine your own destiny, the better off we're going to be, because legislators are never going to be intimately familiar with all the ins and outs of your daily business. My observation has been that, you all do a really good job advocating and trying to explain what's going on to HES and to the CCPO, but there's sort of no substitute for just controlling your own destiny. So that to me is the strength of a sectoral bargaining framework. And I guess I've tried to think through how else could you have such direct influence, and I haven't come up with a way. But maybe people have ideas. I think whatever we're going to do as a state, it's important that you all remain in the driver's seat. So I like the idea of a framework that empowers you. I've told my colleagues, there are a lot of ways that we could try to raise wages in the childcare sector. We could set a minimum wage. We could set a prevailing wage where if you have a subsidized slot, you're going to pay X number of dollars per hour. I think the downside of all those policies where we dictate as a legislature is that they would tend to be less flexible, and it would be hard for us to adapt when you as a sector face changing circumstances. So I'd rather empower you and let you sort of govern those resources.
Thank you. Jamie, those were a great set of questions. Did we get answers to those, or any follow-up to that?
Yeah, I think that was helpful information to hear. And again, just thank you.
Thank you. What other questions are coming up?
I saw one about licensed providers, and Stephanie, could you explain so the state based its projected sort of election scenario conducted through Aura on Thread's estimate of 6,500 workers in the childcare sector. Mm-hmm. Those 6,500 workers, were those just licensed providers, or was that an estimate of unlicensed providers as well?
That's a great question. So that is a number of everyone working in a licensed or regulated early childhood education program in Alaska. So for us, we define that as licensed childcare centers and homes, licensed Head Start and early Head Start, tribal, military, tribal childcare, licensed school age, and am I missing one? I think that's it. And pre-K.
Okay.
So that is what encompasses that number.
Okay. So yeah, to answer the question in the chat from Melinda, I think our assumption has been that the 6,500 people who would receive ballots are the 6,500 people who Thread has identified as working in a licensed facility in the sector. I think if there was just a person sort of informally taking care of kids and being paid, I don't know that the state would be aware of that person, and I don't know how they would get sent a ballot.
This does bring up a question that came up. Elizabeth mentioned the Alaska Early Childhood Advocacy Group, and in our conversations, we were talking about licensed and regulated care in different sectors that are not through the state, like some tribal child care partners. And so one of the recommendations that Thread has provided in our endorsement of the bill, for example, is that this money, for example, is available only for those licensed and regulated in the state and having that partnership with the state. That is for an intentional reason that should be familiar with all of you, that we want to ensure with public dollars that there's a guarantee of that programs and providers are following health and safety guidelines and following background checks and foundational elements to provide quality care in Alaska. So that's really a minimum threshold that we're looking at and honoring those of you working in licensed childcare programs that is an investment that you're making to provide that quality care. But I think what's different is some of our Head Start programs, for example, and then the tribal programs, like I mentioned, are directly federally regulated and don't have a regulatory body at the state level. So we've gotten some questions about how that would work for the larger sector, which I'm not sure quite how to answer that yet, other than there would be ways I think we could develop a stronger linkage of partnership at the state level to provide and support that. But I'm not sure if you have ideas, Representative.
Well, I agree. I mean, number one, I don't know how unlicensed people could participate because I don't even know how the state would know who they are. And if you're just sending money to people who have an informal business, how is their accountability? I mean, my hope is that as you strengthen a sector, you create a sector where the economics work for everyone, you tend to encourage people to become licensed, which is a good thing for kids. Probably a good thing for the workforce too. And then in terms of Head Start and tribal entities, I mean, I would hope that we could have their voice at the table, and the intent of the bill has been to be as inclusive as possible. Because again, I mean, I think the interests in the sector kind of stretch across provider types.
It does. And I want to underscore what you said earlier, that it doesn't matter what provider type you are, everyone ultimately has a lot of the same needs and are in alignment for those needs. And so I do think there's opportunity in the future to strengthen those relationships and partnerships. Many of us are already doing that in a lot of our work. I just say that at the regulatory level, we still have some of those silos just naturally built that would need to be taken into consideration. The other conversation we had, and I don't know if you have talked with some of our legislators in more rural and remote communities, there's some areas of Alaska that are childcare deserts and don't have childcare at all. So, could some of this money, for example, be available to help start childcare? So people have asked that question too. That is a goal as part of the Child Care Program Office Development Fund program. Like, that's part of their strategic plan, and it's a part of the Early Childhood Statewide Strategic Plan. But what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, so if you had a sectoral bargaining framework and you were basically making decisions about how to allocate resources, you could certainly decide that we're going to allocate a certain amount on startup costs, whether those are more administrative or those are more capital costs. I think the other dynamic here is I'd love to see a childcare sector that had a ton of political power, that was united. And I think to the extent that the sector did have more political power, you might also pursue things like seeking capital budget appropriations to build and expand childcare facilities. I've advocated for capital investments for the Little Bears facility in Girdwood. I bet there are a lot more that we should be investing in, right? It would be nice to have that collective voice and maybe not just, use funds allocated through the CCPO, but start using some general fund dollars in the capital budget to start expanding our childcare facilities, because the capital needs, I mean, those are really hard. How are you going to convince someone to make a loan for capital facilities for a sector that's sort of fundamentally just not profitable? That's a challenge, and it's a very reasonable state investment.
Thank you. What other questions do people have? No questions. People are ready to take action.
Can I add one thing, Stephanie?
Yes, go ahead.
I mean, it's really good to sort of wrap our hands around, what does this policy mean? Is this the best policy to be pursuing? Should we change it in any way as it moves forward? But I think it's important for everyone who's advocating to understand, for some legislators, there is no awareness of the urgency of helping the childcare sector. And actually, the most important thing that y'all are doing with legislators is educating them on the urgency to do something. At every committee that this bill has been in, number one, a majority of people have supported the bill and supported the sector. That's great. But in every committee, someone has said something along the lines of, well, why don't moms just stay home and take care of their kids? So there's still a group of legislators out there who don't understand kind of the economic realities families are facing and don't understand the need for public involvement in the sector. So when you communicate to legislators about the urgency of helping the sector, that is really important, in addition to the specific advocacy about, sectoral bargaining or child care trust fund or other elements of the legislation that you think are important.
Representative Fields, do you have some talking points that you would suggest for those particular legislators who would say, I think that this isn't necessarily needed, all the people I know care for their kids at home? Like, what are the things that might resonate? Workforce development, increase business opportunities in their communities? I don't know, just what are some suggestions, if you can offer some?
Yeah, I think number one, sharing your personal experiences, like when Candy and Christina and Blue testified before House Finance, they had specific examples from their community, from centers that they had worked in, about how parents are paying a lot and providers are not paying their employees enough, and it's a trap. And that, number one, makes it impossible to recruit and retain employees to provide enough childcare for parents who need care. And when that happens, there are businesses that are going without the workers who they need. So I think the workforce angle is really important. Our businesses face a huge labor shortage. It's the number one thing we hear from businesses, is a labor shortage. There is no question the lack of affordable, available childcare is one of the prime drivers of that shortage. It's not the only factor, but it is a huge factor. And I think hearing from people just about, they have people working for them who are, I think, on average earning $13.50 or so per hour. And that's $6.50 less than you would earn if you went to work at Target or Safeway in Anchorage. I mean, how can you possibly have an adequate supply of workforce at those wage levels? It's just not possible.
Thank you.
And I think it's, I've tried to tell people, look, if parents have the financial means for one parent to stay at home and the other to work, and they want to do that, that's awesome. I wish every parent had that choice, but that's not the reality. And I think just reminding people that, parents are making hard choices, and that a minority of people have the luxury of one parent earning enough to support an entire family.
That was a great question. Thank you. Those talking points matter. Charlay's asking in the chat, would there be a distinction of areas of the state, like Southeast versus Anchorage, for example, or would this be something that would be negotiated?
You would determine that. I mean, if you all saw that costs in Western Alaska are 25% higher, and wages or something else needed to be adjusted accordingly, then you could negotiate that, but it would not be dictated by this bill. This bill is just a framework for you to negotiate.
Great, thank you. There's a few people who've just joined, so welcome. We're just doing question and answer right now. So if you have questions about House Bill 149, the collective bargaining, or the Child Care Trust Fund, feel free to raise your hand or take yourself off mute or drop a question in the chat. Any other questions that come to mind? So maybe as we think of our questions, Representative Fields, can you talk a little bit about just the sequence of the legislative process of what would happen next? Kind of what's the timeline, and where do you need our help and support along the way?
Yeah, I think there are kind of two key decision points. Number one, passing this bill on the House floor is really important, because most bills don't pass. Getting a child care bill across the House floor would continue to elevate this issue in a way that it just hadn't been a priority. It will be a close vote because a narrowly divided legislature. And I think the advocacy that you all have been doing to House members is really important. There are people who are sympathetic to the child care sector, and your advocacy empowers them. And then there are people who maybe haven't thought about it a lot, and your advocacy educates them. Number two, and this is on resource allocations and this the imperative to get more resources in the sector. When you're advocating with House and Senate members of leadership and finance committee members, you're arguing that childcare is as important as anything else we're dealing with in terms of resources. And you're sort of fighting for resources in a childcare trust fund, which has to be part of the endgame negotiations this session. So number one, we need to win a floor vote. Number two, you all are elevating this for our leadership as an issue where we need to put some resources into it. And we really need to advance the bill at the same time that we're elevating it as a leadership topic of this is something that we're going to deal with this session.
That's great. So the first step is getting a vote on the House floor. So you said what will likely happen first, right, is that next week, it sounds like just from the news that the House will be taking up the operating budget. And then you're hoping this will be addressed around the same time or closely following.
It would
Is that
be
right?
after when we do the
Okay.
budget. That's all we do.
Okay.
And my hope would be that we can have the will and the support to pass on the floor. I hope not too long after the operating budget. But your advocacy, when you advocate and you raise the sort of the sense of urgency, you make it more likely that it'll be on the floor very soon after the operating budget. You're just competing with a bunch of other groups that are out there saying, deal with my issue, right? So you have to be louder. That's all it is.
We can be loud, right? We have the power of all of us from across the state. I see a lot of friends here from all over. So maybe the question is, how do we advocate? So hopefully you all are receiving Threads action alerts, and we try to make that as easy as possible for you to fill out a little bit of information and just push send. And if you use your home address, that's going to go directly to your district senator and representative. So that's a great, easy way to do that. And also to share your story. You can delete that kind of text box. It looks like an email, or you can add your own story to that. I think it's compelling for people to hear what's happening for you. If you're a parent struggling with, your childcare closing and you need to get to work, tell that story. If you're an employer who, is missing out on some of your employees being reliable at work, tell that story. Many of you are from the childcare sector, so to be talking about that story is really important. So if you're not already seeing those messages from Thread, please let me know and we can make sure you receive it. But when you are receiving them, please take action and know that your voice matters. So that part is important, and legislators are tracking those, they're reading each one, and that is part of your voice that matters. So Marcy's asking, so some legislators are doing local district kind of town halls. Sounds like her legislators, she might have a chance to see them on Saturday. So what should she tell them?
Go see them.
Go see them.
Tell them, ask them if, Marcy, where do you live? What district?
I live in Sutton.
Great.
So I have George Rauscher and Mike Showers.
Great. Talk to them.
Yeah.
And, explain what you're seeing. And you could mention that, through Thread, you've been following this bill, House Bill 149. And, talk about the reason to get more resources in the sector and how the sector needs to be empowered in determining its own destiny. And then, Stephanie, I saw Charlotte asked another question about if she's on a 501c3 with the board of directors be negotiating, or would it be individual providers? And everyone in the sector who chose to participate in collective bargaining would elect the leadership of that organization and determine who would be negotiating for them. So it could be either that, but you would decide that. It wouldn't necessarily be, the existing board of directors of a C3 or the existing director of a child care center. That would be a decision you all would make together.
Great. That's a great question. Thank you. What other questions do people have? I think the talking points are an important one. So I'm glad you brought that up, Mercy, of, what do we say? And, in addition to your personal story, which I just encourage you all to share and be brave to share what's been going on with you, what are some of the struggles and what you really need. But the two messages, like Representative Fields said, are that, childcare is underfunded and needs support. We need urgent investment and more public investment. So many of you are receiving the childcare, stabilization and COVID relief funds. That is short-term. And while that's helping in the short term, we need long-term solutions. So the long-term solution is to, allow for opportunity for more decision-making, power in the sector. And you want to be there for the long haul. And the only way we're going to do that together is, in a collective voice and more investment into the sector. Do people have other helpful talking points or thoughts to add?
If we already wrote a letter, is it helpful to write another letter from a different angle, or do we just leave it with our first letter?
I think you can also call the office, if you haven't gotten a response, call the office and check in, see what they're thinking. If you've already written a letter, you should also consider writing a letter to the editor of the ADN. The local business person, Dan Volan, wrote a great op-ed recently. Stephanie wrote a great op-ed about childcare recently. Letters to the editor, op-eds, people read those. It helps raise the sense of urgency. And yes, if your legislators are in town in person or doing a virtual town hall, absolutely show up at those things and talk to them about it. When they see your face and they listen to your story, people remember that.
Great, thank you. Elizabeth, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I think this is kind of a two-part question. I think I might have missed some comments earlier, so I wanted to return to it. If there was a question about the trust fund and the money, kind of who would decide how the money, where it goes, and would there be kind of a way to focus on equity around the state so that it also went to the places that needed it most? It went to rural Alaska. It went to some places that are just not shored up with some of the licensed care. So I don't know if that's something we could talk about separate from licensed childcare, but if there was a childcare trust fund, could it be equitable? And then if so, is there a talking point around that we should stress when we talk to legislators? I know everybody uses that word and some people hear it differently. Some people really resonate with a call for equity and how this would improve that, and others, I don't know if that's a buzzword in a positive or negative way. Is there a talking point around that you would suggest we focus on?
Yeah, I think the talking point is that the sector should be in control. And, that's
okay.
If you had a trust fund and it was managed by the Child Care Program Office, obviously that would be, and it had money in it, that would be better than what we have now, right? Because it would be more resources. But it would be much better if you as a sector had control over it. So if there was a trust fund and House Bill 149 passed as written, you as a sector would control how that money is dispersed in negotiations with the Child Care Program Office. So assuming that this organization that you would form is representative of providers around the state, which I think it would be, then you would be in the best position to make sure that those investments are equitable because they would be informed by providers from all around the state. And that to me is really the importance of having a structure for the state to listen to you and for you to exert real influence in as representative a manner as possible of a diverse sector. I don't think there's like a legislative formula or an administrative regulation formula that can replace direct input from the sector.
Great, thanks. Did that answer your question, Elizabeth? Great, okay.
Yes, thank you very much. Oh, I'll take my hand down, sorry.
No, that's okay. I just want to make sure. Great. Other thoughts or questions? I'm curious, what your thoughts are if this excites you or, where you maybe have concerns, or when you're talking with your peers and others, what are some of the conversations coming up?
Zach, there's a question in the chat.
And Stephanie, Barbara just posted a question. Can you speak to finding the trust fund with collective bargaining? How's that strengthened the bill? What is it the bill? I have not heard opposition to the bill. Early in the process, I heard from one provider who didn't want to be basically forced to unionize. So I met with that provider and explained, no, you're not forced to. So I think it's important for people to understand that, but there's been no opposition to the bill. I think having a trust fund that providers have influence over strengthens the bill because, as Stephanie said, you need both more power and the resources to stabilize the sector. Both are really important.
Great, thank you. Barb, chime in if we answered your question or if there's a follow-up to that. Can you repeat again a little bit more about the timeline? So this is the second of a 2-year session. So this bill introduced at the end of the session, which will go till May, are you thinking?
Yeah, it'll go till mid-May.
Okay, mid-May. Then it sunsets, right? So I just kind of want to remind people what happens is that if it does not pass when the legislature disembarks at the end in May, in the middle of May, then we start all over. There's an election season, of course, this fall, and then there'll be a new legislature that begins. So this is the time, and this is now for the next several weeks. So the first goal is
That's
to,
right.
Yep, go ahead.
It's kind of now or never for this bill, and
Oh, that just cut out for me. Did it for anybody else? Okay. We'll give it a minute, but Tristan, I don't know if you want to chime in.
I think
Say hello, who you are.
There he is.
Stephanie, you're correct. If this bill does not pass, it's all back to square one in the next session.
Okay, thank you. And can you remind people the process? So the next goal is to get this passed on the full House floor. Then it would go to the Senate. Can you talk about the steps the sequence of what happens between now and mid-May?
Yep. So if it passes on the House floor, it'll be referred over to the Senate. Then we would need to get it through the Senate committees. The Senate president determines which committees it's referred to. But I think, really there are two things that we need to do simultaneously. Number one, pass across the House floor. Number two, elevate it as a priority for the leadership of both chambers, so that as we approach the end of session, the leadership who make decisions about resource allocations are planning on putting money into a trust fund, because those decisions can be made simultaneously to a bill progressing. For example, we have a bill to raise base student allocation for education. That bill has not passed yet, but our leadership is assuming it will pass, and it costs $57 million, and that is earmarked in the budget. So you all want the leadership to be in their minds for this end of session package, which is both policy and appropriations. You want them to be thinking, we're putting some meaningful amount of money into a child care trust fund as the bill progresses.
Great, thank you. And can you remind us who gets to decide how much the trust fund investment is, and what is the goal for how much it should be?
Yeah, I mean, to oversimplify only slightly, the Senate Finance Committee. That's the bill's last stop before the Senate floor. If it passes, the senators will be determinative of how much money it is. Oil prices change every day, and that will influence people's thinking. But I think that you all should continue to advocate for hundreds of millions of dollars being invested in this trust fund. And basically under an endowment model, every 100 million you invest in the trust fund will produce on an annual basis $1 million without depleting the principal. So, my very, very quick back of the envelope math was if you capitalize the fund at 200 million, and I realize it's not as simple, but put all that money into wages, you'd increase workers' wages, I think, by about $3,000 per person. That'd be meaningful, right? So obviously more is better. But I think it's not unreasonable for y'all to ask for capitalizing a fund that can inject millions of dollars per year into the sector on a sustainable basis, because the people who really run the Senate and the House assume that we have an oil revenue windfall this 1 year, and they do want to save the money. They want to manage it responsibly. And I think that's kind of the appeal of an endowment model, right? We're putting away this one-time money in a way that makes a difference over the long term and does not require additional, additive appropriations next year. Once it's saved and is spitting out money in an endowment, we've done a good thing for the long term.
Great, and I'm happy to share with all of you in Thread's advocacy letter to House members, we asked for them to consider a $500 million endowment. So,
and that's great. That's a great request. I think Elizabeth had a question.
Well,
Yeah,
and you
go
kind of
ahead.
answered it, Stephanie. I don't mean to be talking so much, but so I was waiting to see if anybody else had a question. But Zach, when you were just talking about the numbers, that jumped out at me, and I thought, okay, so is that a really good talking point? Even though you just pulled that money out and kind of said, I think it would estimate to this. Is there any breakdown like that, and would that be helpful for people who love to see numbers to say, for example, this amount would turn into this much for a person who would then give this much back to the economy because they would be able to, or some type of, would you encourage that in our letters and in our stories to use math? That's my basic question.
That's a very difficult question to answer. And I think that sticking with the talking points that Stephanie articulated earlier is probably your best bet. And the reason it's difficult is you don't want to say, well, it's $500 million or nothing, or it's $200 million or nothing, right? I mean, either of those would be huge for the childcare sector, right? So you don't want people to misconstrue your comments as all or nothing. And that's kind of the risk of putting a number out there and saying this would be the impact. I think it's very reasonable to say, to pick a number like 500 million and say, this would absolutely be transformative for the sector, it would stabilize the sector. But I don't think you want to convey it as an all or nothing proposition, because it's not.
Thank you. That does get tricky. Charlie, go ahead.
This may sound silly, but I don't know the exact processes of the legislative Senate and the House. But when it does get to the Finance Committee in the Senate, do we write a letter directly to the Senate Finance Committee with our talking points, or do they just take the letters that we wrote to the House and put them over there and say, this is the
you will want to be advocating in each stage of the process, right? Right now you want to be advocating with all legislators in the form that Stephanie is managing. That is great. Assuming we're able to get this bill across the House floor, really your advocacy at that point will need to be very intense and directed at the committee or committees to which the bill has been referred. So you will repeat that advocacy to those committee members. And, once it goes to those committees, you might want to have everyone from around the state direct comments to those committee members, even if they don't live in their district, just to kind of, raise the sense of urgency. But what you're doing right now is perfect, because we need to both win a floor vote and anticipate senators and the other committees who will be considering it. So a broad approach at this point is the most appropriate, but the advocacy will need to continue.
That is a great question, Charlie. And I would just add to that when the bill passes the House floor and moves to the next step, Thread will send out another targeted message for you to target the next group, right? So we'll help you with those advocacy messages along the way. And again, if you want to, write your own story or do something on top of that, you certainly can do that. It's not going to hurt. Who are the other champions supporting you and standing beside you to support childcare?
Well, I mean, Kelly Merrick, brought this bill before the House Finance Committee and ensured that it passed. And there are literally dozens of other bills and dozens of other legislators who had other bills that they wanted to be heard first. So I think she deserves a lot of credit for, by virtue of passing this, elevating it, assigning it a sense of priority, giving it a chance to pass this session. Ivy Sponholz, as the co-chair of Labor and Commerce, has, we've worked together on every attempt to strengthen the childcare sector. So that's been a critical partnership. Tom Begich on the Senate side has prioritized this, is prioritizing this for sort of end of session negotiations. The Senate is very interesting right now because technically they have an all Republican majority. They actually have an informal bipartisan majority composed of Tom Begich and the Democrats and basically the Senate Republican moderates. So if we're going to prevail, it is going to be because basically Tom Begich and the Senate Democrats make this a must-have. And Tom is prioritizing it. So I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. And then I would add Sarah Rasmussen, by supporting it coming out of House Finance, broadens the bipartisan support, and that's really important. So definitely a lot of people have been involved with it.
Thank you, that's helpful. What other questions or thoughts do people have? Anything else? Tristan shared a resource in the chat. So I just wanted to call your attention to that. It's an example how childcare trust funds can grow. So thank you, Tristan, for sharing that. And we have a few resources on our website we'll continue to share. And, we can continue to be available for questions. Hopefully just keep monitoring your email for our alerts and updates. We'll keep that updated. Representative Fields, it looks like we have a room full of strong advocates with us tonight, but all of you have big circles of networks, even in the families who you're working with every day. What would you say is a message of how they can share this with their coworkers and peers, their community partners, and the parents that they're with every day?
Yeah, it is so important for childcare providers to make it easy for parents to weigh in. And I know that Christina, our childcare provider, Hillcrest, has done a great job, and Christina has worked with her employees on, helping them advocate. And it's so important to hear from the whole, family of providers, employees, parents, because really, we as legislators can push as hard as we want, but until there is very strong advocacy, we're not going to succeed. So it absolutely is a partnership. And thanks for what y'all are doing.
Yes, thank you. So one easy step would be, forward them the action alert that you received from Thread. So you can forward that, put it in the link in your newsletter, so they can just take direct action from the communication you are already having with them, which is great. Melinda, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just had another in the weeds question. So some, as Stephanie spoke to, some of the licensed childcare programs or preschool programs are through school districts, obviously. So I'm sure there's a requirement for the school district teachers to participate in their union, but would they be able to participate in this other collective bargaining? I was just curious.
Thanks. And I turned on my video just because I was hearing some delay and didn't know if it was on my end. So these are full-time childcare providers who are also teachers.
We have in Anchorage, there's pre-K programs that are licensed also, and they're part of the school district. So I was just thinking that through, that could they participate in both their own union, and then if there was this childcare collective bargaining unit, or they probably would have to choose default to their school district, I guess is probably what would happen.
Yeah, I don't envision district employees who teach pre-K being part of this sectoral bargaining unit. Because I think as we hopefully continue to expand pre-K in the state, those are, you know, and include ASD district employees.
All right, I think Representative, you're cutting in and out a little bit more, but
I
you wanna maybe-
apologize. I'll turn the video off.
okay,
What's going on? Give me one. I'm just having internet issues. I'm sorry, we had a Wi-Fi issue, so I'm just gonna turn the video off to make sure I'm not having a delay. I apologize for that.
okay, thank you. So I think you were saying, since I think it would follow the employer, right? So if they're a paid employee of the district, they would stay in that union. Is that what you said? Okay,
Yeah, I don't envision, you know, teachers who are teaching pre-K and are school district employees being in this unit because they are already employees of a collectively bargained employer. And I think long term, we're going to shift toward pre-K being just a part of the public education system. And it already is.
okay, great. Right, any final comments or questions? This has been a great discussion, very helpful. You know, we've learned more about the bill, what's in it, the intent of it, that it now includes a child care trust fund. We've learned more about the process, the timeline of what happens next. And we have talked about how to take action and some steps of how to strengthen your advocacy and leadership, which we really appreciate. So any other themes or comments or questions that people have? Okay, while we're wrapping up, I will drop in the link to the evaluation in the code. And anyone is welcome to chime in with comments, questions, or Representative Fields, if you have more you wanted to add or share, you're welcome to.
Just be vigorous in your advocacy. Thank you. We've got to seize this moment.
Jen, I might need your help with making this more of a quick link. I'm going to send it to you.
Yeah, if you send it to me, I'll see what I can do.
Thank you, Representative Fields and Tristan, and kind of all of your people and your families for what they give up because you serve in the legislature. It's a whole family deal. We know it's really very time consuming, and thanks for your care for this sector.
Yes, thank you. I echo that thanks and appreciate your leadership and, you know, sticking your neck out for childcare and leading the way with much needed childcare legislation. So thank you so much.
Great to
So
see
thank
everyone.
you. Yeah,
Until next
thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
We're working on the evaluation link, so thanks for your patience. We'll get that up in just a minute.
I'm working on the link, but I dropped the code while I'm waiting.
Thanks for your help, Jen. try to do it this way too. Okay, see if that works. Okay, that might work. I clicked on it, Jen, and then just copied and pasted from the bar. So we'll see if that works. Okay, so we now have the link and the code in the chat. So let us know if you need any help with that. And thank you for being here and taking action. We really appreciate you joining us tonight. Thank you.